Um, I want to look at God at Work, which some of you would have seen the book. Again, it was meant to help those in the workplace to find, to live each day with purpose. And this session, I want to, as ever, I want to try and find an opportunity in the scriptures to be able to just look at at work, and I come at it in a sort of fresh way, because it struck me, and all the other content that you might want is either on the website God at Work or in the book, and there are a number of materials there if you want to go through it, and it's far better that you do that in your time than for me to try and cram too many practical things in here. So somewhat unusually, I'm going to read from John's Gospel about something that on the face of it doesn't immediately seem to apply, but bear with me, it will in the end. So God at Work has been something that I wanted to write because, like many people, struggling in the workplace, I did want to try and think through my own thoughts and hopefully help others to find theirs. When I was chairman of one of the banks, a young analyst was told that the chairman wanted to see him, and so he turned to his colleague and said, "Well, chairman wants to see me. What should I do?" So the colleague said to him, "Well, why didn't you just Google him and find out something about him so you might know?" So he Googles Ken Costa, and up comes God at Work. And so he turns to his colleague and says, "Flip, the guy's arrogant." Well, enough of that. Let me read you a story. After this, that is, after what? After the greatest tragedy and disappointment that the disciples could possibly face. After this, there is always an after this in our workplaces. There is always, in our homes, in our families, there is always an after this, which was the crucifixion of Jesus. There was the messianic hope dead, the restorer of good things dead, the healer dead, the kicking out of the vision to see the Romans thrown out, the political situation changed, dead. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. So, after this, Jesus doesn't disappear. After the heartache, the pain, the harshness of the workplace, just that sheer stress of the workplace. You don't have to tell me, I don't have to tell you, it's stressful out there. Pressure is building day after day after day. How do we cope with this? How do we work in the workplace without this, with just the relentlessness of performances or performance reviews that are required to be done regularly, tasks that you've never got enough time to do, never enough resources to get done. I mean, it is a relentless thing. And there are disappointments, there are failures, there are situations that we can't cope. And Jesus says, after this, so after any of these things, there's always, Jesus comes back. And he says to these disciples in this way. So he names the people that are there. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, two other disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." It's at this stage of all our lives where you face something of acute disappointment. If you're a millennial, you say, "I'm going traveling." If you're Peter, you're saying, "I'm going fishing." I'm getting out of town. I'm getting out of town. This whole thing's been a screw up from the beginning. Here's the guy, he died. Now what? What? Okay, they saw him rise again, but what? what's going to happen? And there's always that temptation to leave in the face of real hardship. And the workplace, in my view, when I talk about the workplace, I see it as one of the most difficult areas of the whole of our human intercourse for God to reach to. But then on the cross, in that strange kingdom, Jesus reached to the very utmost part. And so I think if he can reach there, he can reach our places of work. Tough as the harsh commercial compromises are that we have to make. Anybody in business will tell you it's no ride in the park. Every day is a difficult balance. The judgments that you have to make. Sometimes you get them right, sometimes you get them wrong. But there's a harshness in the competitive world in which we're living. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. Now, when one person says, I'm clearing out of town, guess what the others do? We will go with you. Funny that about leaders. That's why leadership is so important. Is that when people speak something into a situation that others resonate with, they're down in the dumps. And they don't know what to make of all the events that have gone on. And he says, they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. I don't know whether you know what it's like when you're at work and it's just not working. You're struggling and you catch nothing. It's hard. You've done everything you can. They're professionals. They go back to what they know. Don't forget that they were called for the first time on a boat. That's when Jesus called them. So they go back to what they know. And all night, they catch nothing. And that was their living, don't forget, before they found this itinerant preacher to go and attach themselves to. That's what they did. And I suppose the question I have about the workplace is, we just judge work by productivity, by what you produce, by how many fish you've caught. And many of us would just see work as it makes a living, but does it make a life? It makes a living, but does it make for life? And that is one of the really difficult things we have to come to terms with, is that when we are working, we have to deal with frustration. It is part of the whole nature. Go back to the book of Genesis. When the first creation, God created work, he created it as being good. And if you look into Genesis chapter 2 or 3, there was gold, and they said the gold there was good. And gold for that time was, was money. So it starts in the garden as being something that is good, and is a service. And when we get to heaven, what are we going to do when we get to heaven? We're going to work. How are we going to work? We're going to serve each other. That's pretty well the picture that we have. So they arrive. Just imagine the scene. Just take for a moment and just meditate on the scene. It's the middle of the night. You don't know what to make of your life. You don't know where the future is going to be. You've gone back to what you think you know, what you're trained to do. You were trained as an accountant, so you start doing the books again. And there's nothing there. Peter comes and says, you know what, let's go and do something else. And they say, yeah, let's go cycling. So we all go cycling. I'm only using an example that I'm never tempted by. They go out, they get into boat. Then just as day was breaking, and again, this is picture language. Just as day was breaking, day does break. The storms don't always last forever. But if I may just add one thing, and that is, prepare your storm shelter before the storm. Don't try and put up your tent in the middle of the storm. It just blows away. Prepare yourself beforehand. You'll know that life's going to be tough in your workplace. Start preparing before that. Just as dawn was breaking, just as light was coming, there's a picture. All of John's gospel, so much of John's gospel is the picture of light and darkness. I'm the light of the world. There is light, there is darkness. So you need to see the way what John is. He's sketching a picture for us, and he's building this picture, the story of immense power. Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Now, what were the disciples doing? They were at work. That's what they were doing. And I'm fascinated by this story for this reason. You would have thought, would you not, if you were going to start a religion or start doing what Jesus was doing, to start something new, you would have thought, if I were Jesus, which I'm not, I would have, my last encounter, this is the last time that Jesus is now meeting people, I would have gone back to the temple, to the high priest and said, ta-da, I'm here. I would have gone back to Pilate and said, you thought you gave permission for me to be executed. Guess what? I'm back in town. You would have thought that he would have gone back to the synagogue and said, and taken a scripture from Isaiah and say, it's fulfilled. There you are. Have a look-see. What does he do? What is the last encounter? The last things that people say, or so many of them, are so important to remember the last things. What are the last thing that Jesus does? He sees people at their workplace and meets them where they are working. Do you see what the point I'm trying to make here? It wasn't in the temple. It wasn't for the elite. It wasn't for the educated. It wasn't for the Romans. It wasn't for necessarily his family. Is he not interested in relationships? Why does he go and say goodbye to his mother? I'm reading a bit into it, but play with me for a while. But because he wanted to do something in that event that gives us the greatest confidence of our workplace that he could have done. He hallowed work. He sanctified it by meeting people in their disappointment in that workplace. He knew that from the beginning of time, in the book of Genesis, frustration would stalk us. There's not a person here who's in the workplace that doesn't know the day-to-day agony, the frustration of not being able to get something done, or a colleague doesn't want to do something. A fulfillment order has failed. The books that you're trying to teach from, nobody seems to have read. The frustration of the teacher, But Jesus says, and yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Sometimes we don't recognize blessing. We don't recognize the hand of God in our lives. I often hear people say, I'm having a really tough time. The devil's really been at work. Well, he is at work. That is true. But I very seldom hear them saying, I had an amazing time. God has been so good to me today at work. I really got the order that I was praying for has come through. Seldom hear that. Needless to say, we get hit down by the things that are negative. We remember the negative things, which is why I encourage you, before the end of every day, just remember the blessings of the day. Just count your blessings. 1, 2, 3, 4. It just helps in the balance in understanding the workplace. It is a tough place. But my workstation is my worship station. Precisely because that is where God has called you and called me, tough as it might be. It is not going to be exciting every day. But if you get the core right, the chores will be bearable. If the core is right, your calling is right, your sense in the right place, then the chore, the hard work which you have to do, will be bearable. And so Jesus changes their expectations from disappointment. He says, yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. And Jesus says to them, guys, friends, do you have any fish? And they answer, no. Do you know, that is the most powerful answer you can give, is an honest answer. Have you done a day's work that has produced the result you wanted? No. No, Lord, no. There is nothing, we will find reasons, we will find excuses, we'll find ways of expressing it, but we don't want to often face the reality of it, that there is no fish. I've tried, it's disappointing, there is nothing there. He then says to them, cast your net onto the right side of the boat and you will find some. It's a precise instruction. It's not to the left side or to the bow or to the stern. It's to the right side, to the port side. And you will find something there. You see, the moment Jesus is looking out for you, we think that when we're not looking for him, he's not looking for us. He's on the shore. He's watching them at their work. And he's giving them instructions, detailed instructions, of what it is that they should be doing. And you'd have thought they'd have been pretty unhappy about all of this. And if your work is futile or purposeless or without hope, and a complete stranger comes by and sort of starts giving you advice, your natural reaction would be, not really. But there must have been something in the voice of Jesus, we don't know, that made them, because they didn't know it was him. And often we don't know where our blessings come from. We don't know that it's somebody sitting next to us who actually helps us to achieve something, who becomes an angel at work. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. And that disciple whom Jesus loved, that is John who's writing this, there's nothing modest about him, therefore said to Peter, smart Alec, it is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the full net of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. So 100 yards, you live by the sea. 100 yards is a long way by the sea, I imagine. Even the Sea of Galilee. I don't know whether they could swim or not, but you see what happens is when the moment Peter realizes it's the Lord, the moment he recognizes there is an encounter, the passion takes over and he leaps into the boat and again he leads. And that's what leaders do. He goes out there and they bring the fish on and there is Jesus making a barbecue with fish and laid out and bread. Well, how thoughtful, bread and fish. Again, John playing back the images of the great miracles. So it's an incredibly emotive moment. Firstly, they're back to where they were fishing. Secondly, somebody tells them what they're doing. They say they've done nothing. They put it in. They come out with the fish, 153. They counted them. 153 different species of fish, full of large fish, not small fish. Why does he say large fish? He could have said fish. But they were large fish. In other words, the point he's trying to make is that the resources of the Lord are greater than any of the imaginations that we can have. Now, before you get me wrong, this doesn't happen every day of your life, but it does happen. It does happen. And it happens more often than we ever give credit for because we don't actually recognize the source from which our blessings come when we're in the workplace. Because we switch into work mode and you sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to work. I'm at work on Monday through Friday. I'm at work. And then on Saturday, I'm a dad. I play with the children and I play, and I'm a family person. It doesn't work like that. And even in those moments, he says, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So they haul this whole thing in. There were so many there that the net didn't break. And Jesus says, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. Now, you know that story so well. But the thing that makes it so extraordinary for me is this combination of this way in which Jesus meets them in their workplace, of the way in which the last thing, it's almost like a sacrament. he creates a sacrament. What's a sacrament? An outward sign of something important. And what is it? It's work and community eating together. And more than that, he was already cooking. There was fish already on the barbecue. He could have said, here's some fish. What does he say? Bring me some of the fish that you have caught. That is an essential part of the understanding of God at work, is that he is co-working with us. So he takes what you are prepared to give him, if you are prepared to give it to him, and he turns it into something that is given by him back to us. Bring the fish, put it there, and he then hands it out. Did you notice that? It wasn't a sort of free-for-all. Oh, there's delicious braai. Oh, that chop, because it's the fattest. He brings what you've got, he puts it there, and then he gives it back. So in those two events, the last thing that he does is not to announce the new agenda for the new generation, or for the new covenant, or some great new sermon, or some great set of 10 commandments, 20 things to do, new classic book, 40 days of. Not at all. He meets them and makes the sacrament of their workplaces. And that, of course, is an extraordinary thought. And that the work that we're doing also leads to the community that we're in. That the communities that we work in are the communities where we're eating together, where we're drawn together. He draws them in. They come in, they bring whatever they can. That was the parting of Jesus. He meets us in our workplaces. And throughout the scriptures, again and again, Jesus encounters people in the midst of their work, or God does. So for Peter and Andrew, it was when they were casting their nets in the lake, similar flashback, come follow me. Elisha, the son of Shaphat, was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen when Elijah anointed him and put his coat on him. Moses was tending Jethro's sheep when the bush burned. There was an encounter. It was while he was at work that he saw the encounter with God in the bush. David was at work in the field when Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel. Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress when God encountered with him. Again and again, we see that God challenges us. What does he challenge Gideon at? And his low self-esteem. Gideon, he says, I'm the smallest of the tribes. I'm in a wine press. I'm in a cave. The Philistines are stealing things. I don't want to come out. I don't want to tell everybody I'm a Christian at work. I don't want to mess up my work. I just want to carry on with my work. And in that low self-esteem, God comes and says to him, mighty warrior. That's what your name means. You're hiding behind it. And so there is this long theme that goes all the way back of God creating the work in the first place. And it's hit by frustration. And yet it's redeemed by Jesus that enables us to live day to day in this complex and difficult world that we have to live in. And so he calls us to be drawn in to a relationship with him, to co-work with him in this workplace, so that others will see that from this work we are able to nourish ourselves and the people that are around us. So the Christian workplace is not just a place where you earn your money, it's a redemptive act. It's an act where we are saying that we believe that the workplace is going to be restored in the great return of Christ when he comes back to be with us in suffusing glory, which he will do. We will still continue to work. Until then, our task is to show that this is not just killed with frustration, but is actually redeeming the things that most people think are the most godless place. What do you think of the workplace? It's greedy, it's filled with sort of people of ambition. And by the way, when people say, is it right for a Christian to be ambitious? Well, I can't imagine that you'd be a Christian without being ambitious. Jesus was ambitious. He was working all the time to fulfill what God has called him to do. My only test is this: you should have as much ambition as you possibly can have, consistent with your dependence on a relationship with Jesus. And if your ambition runs ahead of that relationship, you're in trouble. And if your ambition is consistent with that relationship, then you will see enormous fruit growing for the kingdom. My workstation is my worship station. It is a tough place. There is day-to-day stress. When I wrote God at Work, I thought, we will be, now and then you get quite stressful times. The junior doctor that has to work 24, 48 hours, the barrister preparing for a trial, the teacher that's having to mark some very difficult, all the essays at the same time. There are stressful moments, but they go on. But I don't think that anymore. What I now think is that we have 24/7 pressure and stress, and it just doesn't stop. Partly because we've invited it into our lives. We think that this is the terms, that's how you succeed. So we need to recalibrate that whole way in which we are living our lives in the workplace. People say to me, but Ken, how do you have a work-life balance? Well, the moment you ask me that question, you have already fallen into the trap. You've already confirmed in your mind there's something called work and there's something called life. And of course those two are going to be utterly banging their heads together. But if you believe, as Paul writes to the Colossians and says, in Christ Jesus, all things hold together, then there is no such thing as work and life, because work and life are integrated by the Spirit of the living God. And it is the Spirit of God that enables us to draw together all these aspects of the workplace, the harshness, the competitiveness, the fierceness, the frustration, the disappointment, the failures, and pull it together and say, we're creating something that is good. How do you do that? Well, when they ask, is it difficult being a Christian at work? The answer is not at all. It's impossible. It's not difficult, it's impossible. When the disciples asked Jesus, how does a rich man get into the kingdom? He says, it's as difficult as a camel going through the eye of a needle. So he says, well, what are we going to do? The answer? With God, all things are possible. There needs to be a recalibrating of viewing our work in exactly the same way as we see our worship. That which aligns our hearts and minds to the will of God, that fulfills the calling that we have. And as a result of that, we know that what we're doing is hallowed. Because the last thing that Jesus did was to meet with a group of disciples in their workplace and draw them together and give them a model of a community in which they were co-working with him to see people fed the world over. Don't forget, there were 153 fish. They could possibly have eaten 10, a dozen. What did they do with 140? Thank you very much.